Namaste, my name is François Gauthier. I'm a French journalist and writer. I live in India, but I remain very French. At the moment, your Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, is in Paris. He's a guest honor of France's National Day. The 14th of July is the day where the Bastille was taken. The Bastille was the jail where the King of France, the kings of France, used to keep their political prisoners. So when the people of France stormed the Bastille and took over, it was a sign that the revolution had succeeded. So on the 14th of July, we celebrate our Independence Day. It's a bit like the parade in Delhi in January, 26 January. It's very long. Some of it is exciting, but it's very long and ultimately very boring. So Mr. Modi will have to sit through at least 2-3 hours of march past by different corps of the army. What's wonderful is that there is an Indian squad there. There are 3 battalions, and one of them is commanded by a lady, and I'm very happy and very proud of that, because in France often as an image of Indian ladies and Indian women as beaten, raped, burnt for dowries, but actually maybe you don't know it, but India has the most female pilots in the world. India has the most female pilots, commercial pilots in the world, more than America even. So women play a very important role in India. I'm married to a woman, Indian woman, and I'm proud of that. Now, of course, Mr. Macron, the French president, led the red carpet for Mr. Modi. I think it's an economic carpet because for the first time, India is a big buyer. As you know, Indigo has bought 500 Airbuses, so it's a huge order, probably the biggest order in the history of aviation, and also quite a number, Air India has ordered quite a number of Boeing aircraft, also a huge order, one of the biggest ever. Mr. Modi is probably going to buy the Rafale, the Navy Rafale, the most expensive fighter jet in the world, 26 of them I believe, and 3 submarines, Scorpion submarines, which will be assembled in India. So Mr. Modi is welcome, I think, because mostly France wants to sell its weapons and eventually its nuclear plants to India. Now, to my mind, and I remain faithful to India, I remain a friend of India. I have defended India in France for 30 years, telling the French, please invest more in India than in China. India is the country of the future. It is a democracy. It is true that it is more difficult to do business in India because it's a democracy. There is some corruption, there is some red tape, but in the long run, it is safer than in China, where the dictatorship ensures an easier business. You can kick out 3 million people to build a dam or to make highways, which you can't in India. So it is true that it is easier to do business in China. And yet the French are still investing more in China than in India. Mr. Macron was supposed to come to Delhi, to India in January. Instead, he went to China because the French still invest 10 times more in China than in India. And of course, the commercial benefits in China are better than in India. So to my mind, though, again, I want to say that this is a wonderful visit and it's the first time that India is welcomed with such pomp and honor. There is more pomp than substance in that visit. There are many reasons. For instance, yesterday, Indian TVs kept on showing Mr. Modi being welcomed in the French Senate. Now, the French Senate, like the Rajya Sabha in India, doesn't have much powers. Only some laws, which are passed by the MPs, by the Lok Sabha, the French Lok Sabha, La Chambre des députés, are endorsed by the senators. So there was, Mr. Modi was very welcome in the Senate, but the Senate doesn't really have any powers. I think too that the French make a big show of saying that we endorse India's being a candidate to the UN Security Council, whether Russia, France, England, US, and China. So there are 5 members of the United Nations Security Council. India wants to become the 6th. So the French for a long time have said that they endorse India's being a candidate, but actually the French know very well that the Chinese will veto every time, and the Chinese have a power of veto, so every time it is sought, the Chinese oppose it, and it just dies down. Again, the French keep about nuclear energy, nuclear cooperation with India, but it's a long story. For a long time, for 25 years, the French have said that they will give nuclear plans to India, but it has not happened yet. There have been many hurdles, many problems, and it has not happened yet. The France has not sold any nuclear plans to India. Of course, India being a nuclear military power, the world is a little wary of giving nuclear technology to India, but to my mind, India has always been a very peaceful country and only would use its nuclear weapons as a deterrent against Pakistan and China. We also need to know that there's a lot of opposition in the French media to Mr. Modi. The mainstream media like Le Monde, even Le Figaro, which is a rightist newspaper for which I used to work for a long time, or French televisions like France 24 are very anti-Mr. Modi. He's been accused of being one of the worst human rights abusers in the world, which is absolutely untrue, because I've lived in India for a long time, and I know for a fact that there's a great freedom of religion in India. You can be a Christian, you can be a Muslim, you can be a Hindu, you can be a Buddhist, you can be a Parsi or Sikh, and you have entire freedom of practice. So this is a very unjust accusation, but it's been floating around in France, and again during this visit, I saw in France 24, which is the main government news channel in French, English, and Arabic, a long report by an Indian. Actually, she's a Goan Christian Indian called I think Jacinta Pinto, very hostile to Mr. Modi. Also, some of the French MPs decided to boycott the 14th of July celebration today, the parade on the Champs-Élysées, because they are opposed to Mr. Modi being the guest of honor. So this has not come out in the Indian press, and it's a little unfortunate. I want to add also that yesterday also the Indian TV channels were showing, forever, Mr. Modi's speech to the French diaspora. Now the French diaspora is extremely small. It's not like UK or Canada or US, where there's a huge number of Indians who live there, who eventually got US citizenship or UK citizenship or Canadian citizenship. The French Indian diaspora is very small. I mean, there are mostly French Tamils from Pondicherry who opted for French nationality when France left India in 1956, and they mostly live in France, and they're mostly Catholic, and I don't think they're very nationalist and very pro Mr. Modi, the majority of them. So the crowd we saw yesterday was, I think, the performers that were called, there's a big festival of India happening in France called Namaste India, Bonjour India, and thousands of performers, of people who make food, street food, and etc., dancers, etc., are in France at the moment. So these people were there, and they were shown as the French diaspora, which to my mind was a little strange. Now, what could France do to show really substance in its support of India, apart from the fact of the red carpet welcome and that India will buy the Rafale and the submarines, and maybe there will be a few other commercial signings of not such a great importance. India needs geopolitical support. India needs geopolitical support because India is facing a huge threat from China. Now, the French recognize that Tibet is part of China. The French recognize, more or less openly that, eventually Taiwan will become part of China, that China is rightfully asking for the return of Taiwan to the mainland China. No, so why can't the French government recognized Kashmir as part of India. I have covered Kashmir for a long time. And you know, Kashmir has been a seat of Hindu culture. I mean, Shivaism came out of Kashmir. It was at one time it was a very high Buddhist highlight place for pilgrimage. It's there's still some of the biggest pilgrimage like Amarnath, which are in Kashmir. And I have seen with my own eyes the Kashmiri Hindus being chased out of the valley of Kashmir for no other reason that they were not Muslims. Now, why can't the French recognize that Kashmir is part of India? And, there has been separatism in France, in Corsica, for instance, armed separatism. I think it's cooled down quite a lot now, but the Corsicans, which is an island which used to belong to Italy at some point in the 18th century and was conquered back by France. The Corsicans for a long time have asked for their independence. So India never said, you know, Corsica is not part of France. So in the same way, it would be something very meaningful and very helpful to India if France would be the first European country, the first Western country to recognize the fact that Kashmir belongs to India. It is part of the Indian culture, inheritance, spiritual inheritance, and physical inheritance, geophysical inheritance. In the same way, the Chinese are building this new Silk Road, or they call the Belt Road in the Himalayas, crossing Kashmir from Xinjiang up to Pakistan, to the port of Gwadar, where they're going to ship all their goods to Europe and the West. You know, this is a great, for India, it's a great danger because the Chinese are actually coming above them. Not only they're above them in Tibet, but they're above them also now in the Himalayan Pakistan. So France should show some opposition to that Belt Road, to that new Silk Road, which is harmful to India's interest. In the seas, you know, it's all fine to sell India 3 small submarines, which are not, you know, I don't think they can be matched against what the might of the Chinese Navy. But India is fighting along with Vietnam and the Philippines and Japan, you know, against China, which is controlling the passages between the China Sea and the Indian Ocean. So if the French would actually send their own navy to be with the Indian Navy and have a show, you know, of force like the US does, a show of force against the Chinese Navy, which has invaded some of the islands there called the Spratleys Islands and made them into naval and military bases. So I think that visit is important, and Mr. Modi has done a coup. He's again put India on the world map, but yet, if there's a small yet, there is more pomp than substance in this visit. Namaste.